Happy Friday and welcome everybody to the Chris Salcedo Show worldwide. Let the games begin. Hope you have a big weekend planned. Got a big show planned for you guys tonight here on the Chris Salcedo Show. It's kind of bittersweet. Let me talk about the sweet first. We got a brand new contributor coming onto the program. MaryAnna Mancuso will be here. But we're starting off on somewhat of a sad note because, well, the reason I say it's sad is because of where this country has descended into. This last week we saw, of all things politicized, condolence calls from the President of the United States to a grieving family. And it was politicized by left-wing extremist Democrats. This woman by the name of Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. This woman's a freak of nature, ladies and gentlemen. And whereas the president was ill-advised when he was asked about the 4 dead soldiers in Niger to bring in past presidents and their practices in this regard, Mr. Trump does share some responsibility there. It didn't invite what he got from the extremist left wing, which was an examination of, gee, who's he calling and what's he saying, and the politicizing of this phone call. I'm going to play for you in its entirety General Kelly. General Kelly, the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, in a rather extraordinary address to the White House press corps. About 4 minutes long, 5 minutes long. I'm going to play it all for you because you've got to hear this. This is a man who is a general, the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States, and a Gold Star dad. His son was killed in action. And what he saw from Frederica Wilson was disgraceful. What the country saw from Frederica Wilson, who has become emblematic of what the Democrat Party has descended into, was disgraceful. A disgrace to this country. That's how you get in touch with the show. You may want to weigh in on this. ChrisSalcedo.com, ChrisSalcedo.com, and at Chris Salcedo TX on Twitter. Folks, I don't want you to turn away. I want you to watch this. I'll even zoom the camera in so you can see nothing but General Kelly. This is very articulately put, and a general who is probably exasperated at how far our politics in this country has descended, and I would rationalize, courtesy of the Democrat Party.
Most Americans don't know what happens when we lose one of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, or Coast Guardsmen in combat. So let me tell you what happens. Their buddies wrap them up in whatever passes as a shroud, puts them on a helicopter as a routine, and sends them home. Their first stop along the way is when they're packed in ice, typically at the airhead, and then they're flown to usually Europe, where they're then packed in ice again and flown to Dover Air Force Base, where Dover takes care of the remains, embalms them, meticulously dresses them in their uniform with the medals that they've earned, the emblems of their service, and then puts them on another airplane linked up with a casualty officer escort that takes them home. A very, very good movie to watch if you haven't ever seen it is Taking Chance, where this is done in a movie HBO setting. Chance Phelps was killed under my command right next to me, and it's worth seeing that if you've never seen it. So that's the process. While that's happening, a casualty officer typically goes to the home very early in the morning and waits for the first lights to come on. And then he knocks on the door. Typically the mom and dad will answer, wife. And if there is a wife, this is happening in 2 different places. If the parents are divorced, 3 different places. And the casualty officer proceeds to break the heart of a family member and stays with that family until, well, for a long, long time, even after the internment. So that's what happens. Who are these young men and women? They are the best 1% this country produces. Most of you, as Americans, don't know them. Many of you don't know anyone who knows any one of them. But they are the very best this country produces. And they volunteer to protect our country when there's nothing in our country anymore that seems to suggest that self-service to the nation is not only appropriate but required. But that's all right. So some presidents have elected to call. All presidents, I believe, have elected to send letters. If you elect to call a family like this, it is about the most difficult thing you could imagine. There's no perfect way to make that phone call. When I took this job and talked to President Trump about how to do it, my first recommendation was he not do it. Because it's not the phone call that parents, family members are looking forward to. It's nice to do, in my opinion, in any event. He asked me about previous presidents, and I said I can tell you that President Obama, who was my commander-in-chief when I was on active duty, did not call my family. That was not a criticism. That was just to simply say, I don't believe President Obama called. That's not a negative thing. I don't believe President Bush called in all cases. I don't believe any president, particularly when the casualty rates are very, very high, that presidents call. But I believe they're all right. So when I gave that explanation to our president 3 days ago, he elected to make phone calls in the case of the 4 young men who we lost in Niger at the earlier part of this month. But then he said, you know, how do you make these calls? If you're not in the family, if you've never worn the uniform, if you've never been in combat, you can't even imagine how to make that call. But I think he very bravely does make those calls. So he called 4 people the other day and expressed his condolences in the best way that he could. And he said to me, what do I say? I said to him, sir, there's nothing you can do to lighten the burden on these families. But let me tell you what I tell them. And let me tell you what my best friend, Joe Dunford, told me, because he was my casualty officer. He said, Kel, he was doing exactly what he wanted to do when he was killed. He knew what he was getting into by joining that 1%. He knew what the possibilities were because we're at war. And when he died, in the 4 cases we're talking about, Niger, my son's case in Afghanistan, when he died, he was surrounded by the best men on this earth, his friends. That's what the president tried to say to 4 families the other day. I was stunned when I came to work yesterday morning and brokenhearted at what I saw a member of Congress doing. A member of Congress who listened in on a phone call from the President of the United States to a young wife, and in his way tried to express that opinion. He's a brave man, a fallen hero. He knew what he was getting himself into because he enlisted. There's no reason to enlist. He enlisted. And he was where he wanted to be, exactly where he wanted to be, with exactly the people he wanted to be with when his life was taken. That was the message. That was the message that was transmitted. It stuns me that a member of Congress would have listened in on that conversation. Absolutely stuns me. And I thought, at least that was sacred. You know, when I was a kid growing up, a lot of things were sacred in our country. Women were sacred and looked upon with great honor. That's obviously not the case anymore, as we see from recent cases. Life, the dignity of life, was sacred. That's gone. Religion, that seems to be gone as well. Gold Star families, I think that left in the convention over the summer. But I just thought the selfless devotion that brings a man or woman to die on the battlefield, I just thought that that might be sacred. And when I listened to this woman and what she was saying and what she was doing on TV, the only thing I could do to collect my thoughts was to go and walk among the finest men and women on this earth. And you can always find them because they're in Arlington National Cemetery. Went over there for an hour and a half. Walked among the stones, some of whom I put there because they were doing what I told them to do when they were killed.
That's some tough medicine, isn't it? That's some very tough medicine. The general, pretty brave on his part, I thought. Choking back some tears, you could tell. I don't quite have the words to convey to all of you where I feel we've descended in this country. This guy was in the room, by the way, when President Trump dialed up this grieving widow. And Frederica Wilson, the woman he was making reference to, this woman, this contemptible waste of skin, was in the car and decided she would politicize. Now, when she heard what General Kelly just said, you guys heard the level of devotion and sacrifice and the laments he had about what we've lost in this society. What do you think this woman's reaction was? Have a listen. This is what it means to be a Democrat in modern-day America.
Let me tell you what my mother told me when I was little. She said, the dog can bark at the moon all night long, but it doesn't become an issue until the moon barks back.
I don't know. It makes about as much sense as anything the Democrats do, right? I have no idea what the hell that meant. I just don't. But folks, I am for the first time, and this takes a lot for somebody like me who spent my entire life in media. I'm speechless. I'm speechless. This woman and her political party have sunk so low that they would exploit grieving individuals who lost a service member in their family to damage the President of the United States. And you heard what General Kelly said. He advised the President not to make the call. He said, don't do it. It's the hardest thing you're ever going to have to do. There's nothing you can say. Don't do it. And Trump says, no, I want to do it. I want to talk to these people. They've given so much. And he did it. And that woman, Frederica Wilson, politicized it. I'm with General Kelly. I thought there were some things that were supposed to be sacred. But to this party, the only thing that's sacred to them is power. It's all they want. You know, President Bush also spoke yesterday and talked about the degradation of our politics. There it sits. There it sits. And to the former president, who we'll probably talk more about on Monday, to former President Bush, I would say this to you, sir. You didn't do much to push back against those who were degrading our politics. Let's talk about some other issues, if we can. That's Chuck Todd from Meet the Press. He has some issues on his mind.
Is it better to keep this deal in place or get rid of it?
Well, I think right now you're going to see us stay in the deal, because what we hope is that we can improve the situation, and that's the goal. So I think right now we're in the deal to see how we can make it better, and that's the goal. It's not that we're getting out of the deal. We're just trying to make the situation better so that the American people feel safe.
We're talking about the Iran-Obama Ayatollah nuke deal, which, of course, paves the way for the Iranians to become a nuclear power, allows them to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles until they're allowed to freely enrich uranium. And President Trump didn't recertify the deal. So now it kicks over to Congress, where, you know, they're really good at doing absolutely nothing. Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, weighed in on the decertification of the Iran nuke deal and also had something to say about American sanctions and what they could do in the interim to bring some pressure to bear on Tehran.
Well, I think if the U.S. decides to do that on its own, it can do so by its own because it has such immense economic leverage. And I think the Europeans once they think about it, will see that the president is giving them an opportunity to avoid something that is very bad for them today. You know, you don't want, none of us as leaders should, you know, sacrifice the long term or even the middle term for the short term. In the short term, yeah, it's comfortable. They have business ties with Iran and so on that are developing. But in a very few years, Iran will be this humongous power with declared, you know, this is Iran that says death to America, death to Israel. You know, you're the great Satan, we're the little Satan. I suppose Europe in between is a middle-sized Satan. I hope they're not offended. But we're all under their guns. They're developing ballistic missiles, not to fire against us. They already have that. It's to fire against, to threaten Europe, to threaten the United States. So I think when people come around and think about it, they say, we really don't want this bad deal to go through. We really should act now to correct it.
Yeah, well, Congress act. And if past is prologue, probably not. They were all too willing to kick their power over to the former president of the United States, Barack Obama. Other issues, the Republican Party under the gun because, well, everything I just mentioned, their inability to govern.
There's a time and season for everything. And right now, it's a season of war against a GOP establishment. It's no longer acceptable to come and pat you on the head and tell you everything's going to be fine. Just get these guys in office. This is not my war. This is our war. And you all didn't start it.
Yeah, they did. The establishment did. I got to tell you, folks, this week we got word that the Republicans are going to do a deal with Democrats to fix Obamacare. Keep it on the throats of the American people for another 2 years. I think Bannon's correct about this stuff, ladies and gentlemen. President, as much as he would like to glad hand with Republicans and try to put on a brave face, Republicans, like that guy, John McCain, they're not willing to do anything. They're not willing to get out there and have a conversation how to better the country. All they want to do is glad hand with Democrats and just go along to get along. Anything not to give Donald Trump a victory. As a matter of fact, they get even kind of nasty about it, these Republicans.
To fear the world we have organized and led the 3/4 of a century, to abandon the ideals we have advanced around the globe, to refuse the obligations of international leadership and our duty to remain the last best hope of Earth for the sake of some half-baked, spurious nationalism cooked up by people who would rather find scapegoats than solve problems is as unpatriotic as an attachment to any other tired dogma of the past that Americans consigned to the ash heap of history.
Yeah. Where was this speech in the last administration? Everything he just said described President Obama's administration. But he saves this kind of speech, does Senator John McCain, for the likes of Donald Trump, somebody in his own political party and somebody who is actually promising real change. Donald Trump saying that Mr. McCain better watch it because sooner or later he's going to fight back and let's say it won't be pretty. Well,
people have to be careful because at some point I fight back. Yeah. You know, I'm being very nice. I'm being very, very nice. But at some point I fight back and it won't be pretty.
Yeah, well, from his lips to God's ears. Up next, we'll talk about many issues facing this country, facing the Republicans, including that health care reference that I made earlier with MaryAnna Mancuso. Coming up, the Chris Salcedo Show worldwide here on the Vida Television Network. Stick with me. Glad you have tuned into the program here, folks. Joined now by MaryAnna Mancuso, who was brand new here to the Chris Salcedo Show, political strategist, the founder of PoliticalHype.com, a conservative blog focusing on Florida and national politics from a millennial perspective. Mancuso has a strong background in communications and social media, has worked at the New York Bureau of Fox News and NBC Universal. MaryAnna Mancuso, welcome for the first time, the Chris Salcedo Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
All right, let's talk about, you sent me this the other day, and I found it fascinating. This was a link to some Podesta emails that had determined that Hillary Clinton, the Democrat strategy, and this was something that was somewhat well known, that they were eager to face Donald Trump in the general election. They were eager for it because they thought he was the most easily beatable. The problem was, what we didn't know was how much collusion was going on between the Clinton camp and members of the so-called press. Tell me what these emails revealed and what your takeaway was.
Well, it revealed that they were looking to do a huge media push to give him all the media that he needed in order to be able to secure the GOP nomination. But as we saw, even after he secured the GOP nomination, he still managed to win and beat Hillary Clinton at her own game.
Yeah, you know what? That was kind of funny. There was a name they had, and the name is escaping right now in the Podesta emails, of how they classified guys like Cruz, how they classified guys like Donald Trump. They viewed them as crazy people, and they tried to set them up as crazy people, but emblematic of what the Republican Party was, and they tried to ignore Jeb Bush and all the other folks who were more mainstream milquetoast type Republicans. Yes.
Yes, exactly. They referred to Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, and Ben Carson as the Pied Piper candidates.
That was it. Yeah. So this was a strategy, and they colluded with so-called members of the fair press to push this narrative, to promote the Pied Piper candidates, if you will, and then to undermine the moderate milquetoast Republicans. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, they really wanted to undermine your Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, Rand Paul, Jindal, Chris Christie. And, it was really unfortunate because we had such a large pool of qualified candidates on the GOP side, and yet the Democrats had to stoop to this type of level to try and cheat their way into the presidency with such a flawed candidate from the beginning.
Yeah. No, I agree. Let me switch gears to someone who's conducting somewhat of I guess you'd call it a jihad on the biased press, and one of the leaders of what I call the basket of biased press, the New York Times, our buddies over at Project Veritas, and they have New York Times officials, people in charge of, again, making air quotes with my fingers, news, in charge of news. They are some of the most left-wing biased individuals on the planet. Let me read some of these quotes. New York Times journalist, if we write about him, meaning Trump, and how insanely crazy he is, maybe people will read it and be like, we wouldn't vote for him. Now, these are so-called journalists at the New York Times, and they even talk to some of the bosses over there, and they're putting these videos up now as Project Veritas, exposing just how left-wing biased these so-called news agencies are. And you, having worked in some of these newsrooms, Fox, NBC, Universal, what do you think of the efforts of Project Veritas?
I think that it's important to expose a liberal bias or a bias on any slant when it comes to news reporting. At Fox News, we used to always kind of get crap from people saying, oh, you're not fair and balanced. You guys are totally liberal. There's no, you guys are so Republican. You don't have any liberal voice. But the truth of the matter was, a lot of the producers that I was working with at Fox were liberal. Yep. And I found it really interesting because there are some reporters on Fox that are a GOP slant all day, every day. And then there's other people that walk the middle road. But what's important is that when people are coming to the news and coming to the press for information, the information should be delivered in a very fair and balanced way and allow people to make those decisions after reading that information.
Yeah, and you know what about the other outlets, you can find some liberals over at Fox News, and you can find some conservatives over at Fox News. All you find every place else, nothing but liberals and liberal bias. Let me remind you folks who we're talking to, MaryAnna Mancuso. She's a political strategist, and she is founder of PoliticalHype.com, a look at politics from a millennials' perspective. GOP and the Democrats have teamed up on a saving of Obamacare and keeping it down our throats over the next couple of years, and they're using taxpayer money to pay off the crony capitalists inside of the traitorous insurance companies. If this bill is passed, my speculation is the Republican Party as a concern, as an alternative to the Democrats, is over. What do you think?
Yeah, Obamacare is interesting because it was passed, and then what we saw was after it was passed, there was really a huge push to repeal, and now that the Republicans have the opportunity to repeal Obamacare, they're struggling to be able to actually get that accomplished, which I will tell you from where my vantage point is, I find that absolutely ludicrous. And the reason is you guys stumped on this for 8 years. You came out, you campaigned, we're going to repeal Obamacare. We've got this. At what point did the Republicans think, we may need a legislative aid or 20 in a room to figure out how we're actually going to get this done? Did they not think the day was going to happen in which they had the ability to repeal? But at this point in time, we really need to find solutions, and we need to be goal-oriented. And unfortunately for Republicans, that's going to require them to hold their nose and reach across the aisle to find a bipartisan effort to really make this a better idea.
Yeah, and that's the problem, because the other side isn't willing to give up Obamacare because they're more interested in preserving Obama's worthless legacy than they are in helping Americans get out from under the cancer that is Obamacare. And again, I'll redirect you back to my initial question, which was, if the Republican Party does this deal and preserves and dedicates taxpayer money to not only paying off the traitorous insurance companies, but keeping Obamacare for 2 years. And keep in mind, after 2 years, the Republicans may not be in power anymore. If they keep Obamacare afflicting the country for the next 2 years, is the Republican Party finished?
It's not finished, but it will definitely be headed south. That's for certain. Because if they do this deal, what's going to happen with the Republican Party is everything that they have gone and stumped on and campaigned for and swore up and down against, they're going to have no credibility, right? They said, we've got to repeal this. This is a really bad deal for Americans, and we want to save the Americans' medical, insurance. But the truth of the matter is they take this deal, they've just walked away from everything that they swore that they stood for. And they also told their voters and insureds everywhere that they're turning their back on them. And that's unfortunate.
No, it's true. And personified, what you just described, personified in John McCain, who has made a career out of campaigning like a conservative and governing like a left-wing progressive. Here's a guy, there's a montage out there. I think the White House itself put out the montage talking about how he wanted to repeal Obamacare, repeal Obamacare, repeal Obamacare. He never campaigned on, gee, I want to get up to Capitol Hill so we can work on a repeal with Democrats for Obamacare. Oddly enough, he never campaigned on that. But he is emblematic of this betrayal of the Republican Party to the American people on Obamacare. Yes?
Yeah, he's definitely spearheading this forefront view of, we've got to do something for the American people. And I've got to tell you, I'm thinking it's a lot of it because he's not having to worry about answering to the constituency of the Republican Party much longer, which is extremely unfortunate as an American hero.
Yeah, no, you're spot on politically. MaryAnna Mancuso, everybody, political strategist, founder of politicalhype.com. First time on the Chris Salcedo Show. Thank you so much for being here. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
And that'll do it for the Chris Salcedo Show worldwide. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, folks. See you back here on Monday.